The test working group has 3 responsibilities. Testing, of course, the proofs of concept, so experimentation. There's been at least, I think, 46 different proofs of concept that have been done. But we're also responsible for open source outreach and collaboration, and I'll be talking about that as well. So first, I'll go on about the plug test. The plug test, everybody who's talked today is from the NFV group, the industry specification group. You'll hear ISG. The plug test is actually run by ETSI itself. So actually there was one exception. The director general, sorry to explode like that, is from ETSI. They run the plug test. It's run by an organization within ETSI called the CTI, the Center for Testing and Interoperability. They do many plug tests, dozens, I think, a year in many, many different technologies. We have just held our second one in January, and I'll be talking about that. It's open to anybody who wants to participate. You do not have to be an ETSI member to be part of the plug test. And importantly, this is not a certification exercise or an endorsement of any kind. The testing is run by all the participants together. And the results are kept private apart from the statistical summaries, basically. So it's fully protected. Now, one of the tools used for the plug test is what's called the Hive network. So Hive is the hub for interoperability and validation at ETSI. It's simplistically a huge VPN router that allows everybody to participate in this event remotely. So most of the labs, in fact, people don't bring their hardware. The labs are, in fact, remote, and they're connected through Hive to run all the tests. This also, very importantly, allows us to run pre-testing. So the first plug test was in January 2017. Second one was this past January. It was this one was located for the event itself for the week that we were all together. It was held in Sophia Antipolis, so in southern France, and it's the headquarters of ETSI. It was ideal location because they have a huge and wonderful amphitheater, and that's where we were all at. And people would just shuffle around between different test sessions. What's important I want to stress is this is not just a one-week event. There were, in this case, 6 weeks of pre-testing because of the Hive network. So a lot of the testing was done way before we got to Sophia. And that's important because we didn't get there and start plugging stuff in and seeing if it works and running into all the problems. Everything was ironed out way before we got there. So by the time we get there, we get into the more fun, complex test cases. So most of the simple stuff has been handled. There were 45 participating companies, which was huge, 41 functions under test. And here, I want to point out this little part, because they're all classified in 3 parts. So we have a platform, which is NFVI plus Vim. We have VNFs, and then a ManoStack, which is the manager and orchestrator. Every function under test was classified into one of those 3 categories. Every test session, and the way it's organized is there's 2 to 3 test sessions per day. So you get grouped with functions under test from different categories. So it's at least one platform, one ManoStack, and usually more than one VNF, and you'll see why later on. And for that session, everybody sits together and runs through a defined test plan. There is a test plan. It's established way before it's established before the plug test itself, but it's always in motion and it's always being adapted to whatever is going on. So they run through whatever test cases they want to do, and that is called one session. Results recorded privately, nobody knows, but they're aggregated later on for statistical purposes. And I'll show you that in a second as well. There are 100 people on site, 100 engineers, plus at least 100 people supporting the event off-site. So each company had people at their own premises helping out with this. We ran through, I'll go through more details later on, but we ran through 189 test sessions this time around, which was almost double the first plug test. And this time, the second one was co-located with the OSM community that you met earlier on today, and they had a Hackfest at the same time. I want to go back just for a second as well and make a note of what's down there beneath the graphic. Is the ETSI NFV Plugtest is supported by 4 different open source communities. I'm particularly proud of that. OSM, of course, OPNFV from the Linux Foundation, OpenStack is a supporter of this plug test, as well as OpenBaton, which is a small Mano open source community as well. So the plug test is very inclusive and really strikes a good collaboration with open source communities. Being the open source guy, I'm pretty happy. So what's the scope? What does it look like? First of all, the pre-testing. Pre-testing is stuff like onboarding, instantiation, and termination, basic. Network service and VNF manual scaling. So an operator command makes it scale in or out. And then network service updates to be able to terminate and restart a VNF within a network service. Most of these are done way before we get to friends. Then, we've been focusing a lot on, we've been able to move forward up the food chain of functionality and go up to multi-VNF network services for fault and performance management, as well as auto-scaling. Auto-scaling didn't work so well in the first plug test. It was really good this one, and I'll show you some results. We also tested for enhanced platform awareness, so EPA. Multi-site was a big deal this time around. Specific VNFs was an open area that basically nobody wanted part of it. Nobody can explain that. Nobody brought their own specific VNFs. And then automated lifecycle management as well. In addition, this time around in January, since all the SOL specifications that Thin talked to you about were not quite available yet, or they're brand new, nobody had really developed the APIs, we did open up what we called an experimental API validation track, and 4 or 5 companies did participate, and we ran through some tests with that as well. This is just a really too busy graphic showing the participating companies in the plug test, which is an impressive list. And it also includes companies who are coming up to the third plug test that I'll talk about a little bit later on. So the ETSI is looking at this now not just as specific events, but a more or less semi-permanent program that's ongoing. So the infrastructure, the Hive, stays active. So testing can happen in between plug tests. So it's a program and it's ongoing, and things can happen between plug tests themselves. Okay, new people who've joined the program are Nokia. We're happy to see Citrix. I'm happy to see open source again. SUSE is coming in this time around as well. They're bringing in an OPNFV platform. Okay. A few, I won't dwell on this, but these the test cases are always associated with a specific test configuration. These are a few of them for the pre-testing, the multi-VNF, and especially multi-site is pretty interesting here. So network services across data centers like Jeremy was talking about, we're already starting to test those at the plug test. Now, for some of the results, the fun stuff. This is overall. So like I said, 189 test sessions were run, okay, individual sessions with groups of functions under test. It's almost double what had been run in the 2-week event, which was the first plug test. So we've really marched along. I want to explain this. There's 3 columns that are really important. So there's interoperability, okay and no, and then TC's not run, or NA. In specific test sessions, if they were trying to run, say, 20 test cases, if one of the functions under test was not able to support that particular feature, it falls into the test cases not run category. Okay, so it didn't get run. They didn't attempt it because one of the 3 to 4 participants couldn't support it. The columns okay and no are the other. So basically, in this case, of all the test cases, 70% of them were attempted, okay? And of that 70%, 94.5 were successful. This is huge. We've almost doubled that too. Okay, we've increased, the 70% is way up from the first plug test, and then the success rate is really up. So just from this overall results, it tells you that things are moving along. We are progressing as far as interoperability is concerned. And keep that in mind. This is an interoperability event. We don't do performance testing or things like this. This is interop. This is, does thing A talk to thing B the way it should? Okay? It's very important. But this is a marked sign of improvement. Okay. So, a little bit more specific. The pre-testing, which was all the basic stuff, was a 98.8 success rate. Really good. The multi-VNF, 88% success rate as well there as well. So people, and we've been focusing on not just multi-VNF, but multi-vendor multi-VNF. So VNFs from different vendors in the service chain, okay? And that's working really well. Now multi-VNF had a 38% not run rate, still needs to improve. Now, the mandatory sessions. So there's pre-testing and then mandatory. Mandatory, hold on. The multi-VNF, yes, okay, I've dealt with that, sorry, going around. The multi-VNF subgroup, so more details, what's going on. So the test plan contains all these details, by the way. So these are all the individual test cases run in multi-VNF. So it includes things like auto-scaling. So, and there's 3 triggers, 3 ways to do auto-scaling. So it's either a VNF request, an indication from the VNF, or some KPI from the Vim, from OpenStack or whatever Vim you happen to be using. These guys, the auto-scaling, were at below 10% success rate in the first plug test. So this has seen a really dramatic increase. So automatically scaling VNFs based on specific indicators has gone up really well. Fault management, however, and if I look at the VNF request, that one is pretty low as well. The fault management test cases, the ones at the bottom, they still need improvement too. Not many people attempted them. But it's a progression, and it shows a lot of improvement. Optional sessions. So these are other tests that people could try if they supported it. So enhanced platform awareness, so testing the correct placement based on policy. Multi-site, again, had a 100% success rate. The specific VNFs, either direct or indirect, nobody wanted to test it. So we're probably going to take it out for the next plug test. And then lifecycle management validation, 97% success rate there. Again, more improvements. The API track was something new. This was pretty small. A handful of companies wanted to give it a shot. So of all the APIs, 17, I guess, I didn't know that, I never counted them. 5 of them were in scope, and it was based on the open API definitions that I think multiple people talked about. Based on that, people had implementations and wanted to do some basic tests on those specific APIs. There were 29 test cases, mainly around lifecycle management, package management, granting, configuration, and IND. What's IND? I don't even know. Anyway, everything was based on SOL 2 and SOL 3. And there was some decent results. So a 60% pass rate of those who attempted the test cases. So this is pretty good for something that's so early on. This track will be active again for the third plug test coming up in a few weeks, actually. All the results, all the test plans, everything is publicly available. These are hot links to them, but you can also Google them quite easily. ETSI NFV Plugtests, results and test plan. Input into the test plan is always welcome. All participants can do that, but then it's published. The test plan as used for the plug test itself gets frozen and published as well. Part of the focus, part of the reasons for plug tests is also to feed back to the gentleman that put this all together. So whatever we learn at the plug test, if there are ambiguities, errors, whatever happens, we feed it back. We feed it back to IFA, we feed it back to SOL, okay? It's also fed back to TST, because we made errors too. In our interop test specs, we may have done something wrong. We correct it and go on. The test plan itself is based on TST working group work items. So we've got test 2 and test 07 that are interop test plans. They are the basis for this test plan as well. Now, this one I'm excited about as well. The third plug test is coming up. It's a 2-week event, last week in May and first week of June, again to be held at ETSI, thank you. But what I'm excited about is the second week is actually a co-located Plugfest plug test with OPNFV, the Linux Foundation community. I'm not sure how much you know about OPNFV. They're a little bit peculiar in the sense that they're an upstream community where they develop everything into other communities like OpenDaylight, OpenStack, you name it, and then they integrate it. So they turn around and they grab all these components and create a platform and they call themselves a reference platform, but they created basically an NFV platform. Their scope used to be just NFVI and Vim. Now they've augmented it to include Mono, which will come down the road. But as an integration platform, they are by far the most sophisticated testing open source community I've ever met. They do a lot of really good stuff. So combining their ability to be able to automate everything and to execute everything, open source does implementations. We do reports, we do specs, we do recommendations and things. So it's a great combination. We've been collaborating with OPNFV right from the beginning. They started a year after ETSI and NFV started, and we've been working together since then. I'll show you a little bit more details, but this will be fun, basically. We're trying to figure out how we're going to work together and just improve on NFV testing at all. What else? There's also, the API is going to be, the API experimental track will be active, but there's also going to be demos. They're inviting people to bring whatever they got and to show it off. So either 5G, MEC, zero touch, a little early maybe for that, but whatever proofs of concept and whatever things that work, they're going to bring it along. And that's a little bit new for the plug test, and that's kind of fun as well. Again, this is open to anybody who wants to participate. You do not have to be a member. Now, what's the collaboration all about? The highlights are basically OPNFV, jeez, I hate that thing. OPNFV is coming in. What they call is, OPNFV has scenarios. Scenarios are different configurations of the OPNFV platform. It may have ODL in it or may not. It may include FIDO or it may not, etc. So there are a bunch of companies who are registered to the plug test will come in bringing an OPNFV scenario. And some of this stuff is pretty sophisticated. So things like BGP VPN out of OPNFV. SUSE is bringing the SFC project, function chaining project. So the NSH, the IETF NSH protocol will be there, see who can interoperate with that. This is pretty advanced stuff, very cool. For them, the benefit is it gives them way more access to commercial VNFs for their Plugfest. This is very interesting. So it's a two-way collaboration that everybody kind of likes. So they get to validate a lot of their scenarios at this plug test. The Dovetail project within OPNFV is a compliance and conformance verification for OPNFV. We've already offered it up to all the participants. This has nothing to do with interop really, but it lets the hardware and NFVI providers at the plug test run through the Dovetail suite and see how they do. Again, results private though. And then OPNFV is looking at adding test cases as well to this. The test plan exists. They want to run specific test cases. Some of them will be variations of existing ones, meaning adding SFC as a networking layer. In addition to that, some of the test projects, like OPNFV has almost a dozen test projects. They want to come in and try their tests with plug test participants as well. Things like VNF Bench, which is a black box benchmarking test project at OPNFV, and then VSPerf, which tests vSwitches. So all these things, and I've got feet in both trying to put all this together, and it looks like it'll be a success. Okay. Next, Quickly, I do want to tell you a little bit about what's going on at Test Working Group. I want to highlight two new work items that we're working on that are particularly important, I find right now. So Test 009 is NFVI benchmarking, network benchmarking specifically. So if anybody who's ever done network benchmarking will know RFC 2544, which is like the rapporteur for this work item, he called 2544 old enough to vote and buy alcohol. So it's time to update it. So Al Morton has a sense of humor. So basically, this is a virtual update to 2544. So it'll define a series of different benchmarks, which you'll have heard about, but new methodologies about how to measure them accurately and what's important because of a virtualized world, because this is a shared platform. So it talks about the setups, configuration, what the test tools should support, the benchmarks that are currently defined. This is in draft form, by the way. It's at 008 level right now. Throughput, latency, delay variation, loss. Delay variation you might have heard as jitter, which is now a 4-letter word in this world. And more benchmarks are coming up, but far more interesting is the methods. And we had a huge debate about it today, but typically binary searches are used to benchmark something to find out what's the true value. But in a shared platform, you will get sometimes just errors that pop up for no reason, or maybe there is a reason, but they only pop up once in a million. The method has to take this into account, where if you arrive at a certain throughput level, but you had one packet lost, does that mean a failure or not? And it's being examined right now where instead of just saying, nope, it's a failure, you're done, we're saying repeat it. Repeat it X times. If it doesn't happen again, then trust it, it's a good result, and so forth. So it's just taking a new look, and it's basically binary, we're calling it binary search with loss. So how to be a little bit more sensitive to losses that shouldn't happen or didn't only happen once in a while. But it also takes into account that shared resources are part of the picture here. So maybe they should be there. It's not that it's a loss, but you're exceeding the capacity of the platform just because of other processes that pop up. So it's taking a good look into that. And this will be what I think is one of our most valuable work items, along with Test 10. So all these SOL APIs, well, SOL 2, 3, and 5, that you heard about earlier from Finn and Jeremy, we're going to create a conformance test package for each and every API. We are basing it on the open APIs that are developed by SOL. We're grabbing that as input. We are inputting our own test methodology into it because we want to make it a little bit more than just syntax checking. We want to make sure functionality is checked throughout as well. So the test working group is putting that together, but on top of that, our goal is to provide this as a software package that's fully automated. Okay, so this will be beyond a document. Okay, I don't know what format that will be. That's part of the studying we'll do, but we will select a test definition language to describe the tests, and then we will select a language, a coding language, could be Python, I'm not sure yet, that will be an executable, and you can run this. So that this is very different from anything else we've ever produced, to the point where we needed help. So ETSI, thank you again, has approved a budget, so we're actually going to hire people to help us build this. We're going to hire experts to get through this, because like the terminology, voluntary contributions from just our team just wasn't enough to get this out the door in a reasonable time frame. So look up for this. This one's going to be a big deal, I suspect, as well. And with the approval of what's called a special task force, we're going to put that together this summer and start work and hopefully get things done incrementally between winter and spring 2019. Lastly, In general, not just at plug test events, there is a lot of collaboration happening between OP&FV and the test working group. And I stress OP&FV because, like I said, it's a test group, right? So we've already talked about the collaboration with ONAP and OSM, who feed directly into SOL and IFA. But from a testing point of view, OP&FV has been helping us with work item test 06, which deals with DevOps and CI/CD, and trying to fit that into the telecommunications and a telco environment as well. That one's focused mostly on VNFs. But since OP&FV is so mature on what they call cross-community CI, they had a lot of things to say about continuous integration. So they've input into that. Test 08 was a metrics, NFVI metrics specification that relied heavily on the OP&FV barometer project, which did the same thing, but an implementation of it. So they had experience in their hands when they're feeding back information for that. But we're also going to enhance Test 08 with another OP&FV project called VNF Event Stream, VES. That's going to provide a bunch of valuable input into the metrics as well. Test 09 that I talked about, the benchmarking spec, obviously OP&FV VS-Perf project, which is all about benchmarking vSwitches, had a ton of input for that. As well as Test 10, this is potential collaboration here where they may take our automation framework and stick it into their automation framework. So we've started discussions with the FunkTest project for that. So essentially OP&FV platform as a reference could be used for the SOL API tests further on if that is a success. And that's it. Any other questions? Any questions at all? Oh, gentleman had a question, but he left, I guess. What was it? VNF, well, application testing was one of them. Let me deal with that. We haven't, from a spec point of view, we haven't gotten into that yet. Not yet. I'm not. Never mind. Exactly. Don't so breathe. Basically, from simplistically, the application within a VNF is out of scope. That's the stupid answer. For the time being, we're sticking away from it and staying with what's in scope of NFV. So the platforms, lifecycle management of VNFs, things like that, and Mano. But the application within it for the time being is not being looked at all. Having said that, one of the collaboration ideas with OP&FV again is long duration testing and also VNF onboarding, of course, but also performance testing on a specific platform. So we'll take a look at it, whether it results in a work item at ETSI. NFV, I can't guarantee yet. The second part of the question was APIs to help to test. A little bit premature, but we're likely going to approve a new work item in the few coming weeks, which will define recommendations. It's not going to be normative, but it'll be recommendations on a test domain. So a full test setup and recommendations, again, on a language to control that, and also recommendations on APIs to control everything within the test domain for NFV. It's very ambitious, but right now we're well on our way to getting it approved. We'll find out in a few weeks. This is not guaranteed. This is premature, but it is something we're looking at. Yes, sir.
The results from Plug Test 2 are nothing short of amazing.
Yeah.
Do you know why? Was it the pre-test? Was it just the experience of most of the folks having gone through one before? What do you attribute that to? Because I would say keep doing it.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes to both. There was more pre-testing and we're getting used to it. But also the people have progressed with their feature development. Okay, so for example, lifecycle management, auto scaling, people just didn't support it that well, or they supported it in a way that was not interoperable. Now we've taken that leap where it is much more supported by Mano and the VNFs, but not only that, but in an interoperable way. So that to me is a big deal.
Thank you.
On you. We do have a lot of times. So what I would like to do, what time is it? What we can do, since it's a couple of sessions, we kind of rushed through really quick. We didn't have any Q&A. So maybe perhaps I can open up for any general questions to all different sessions, different presentation. If you have any specifics, and I can invite specific person to answer the questions. So open up for a few more. Any specific questions? Yes?
Any plans for security testing?
Can you repeat the question?
Any plans for security testing?
So,
No definite plans yet. Desire, yes. I've been trying to push that personally, and a couple of us as well. It's first of all, it's difficult to test. Then it's also sensitive to test. It's something that I'm not giving up on. I'd love to, because guess what? Last year, got this exact same question. There is interest. Everywhere I go, ask me about it. And it's something I'd like to talk to Alex a little bit more about, just to get a grip on what it would look like. How can you test it? It's not as obvious as network testing, Network testing is like, okay. So we need, but right now, I've proposed it a couple of times, and we're contribution based, right? So if there's no interest, things just don't move forward, and I haven't been able to sell it yet. I'll keep trying though.
Yeah, so I had a question kind of back to the SOL specs. Today we're referencing, Tosca and everything. So you can't really, follow the specs and have a VNF descriptor and give it to, 2 different orchestrators and have it run without modifying the package and customizing it, doing charms or something. Are there enough work items scheduled to close that gap, or are there still, insufficient, phase 3 work items to do that? So I could actually say, if I program and follow this exact set of APIs, this exact metadata, and then actually have interoperability.
okay. A couple things. The VNF descriptor, the Tosca language, or the Tosca-based language and the orchestration. If you look at the Tosca specification, it's not just the language and the template. They actually support the orchestration, Tosca orchestrators, right? In our work, we don't say we are using Tosca orchestrators. What's most important is we need to have a language that we can express the VNF descriptor correctly, the intent from the VNF providers. And it's a common standard that we all can use. Now, there are going to be, in the context of ETSI NFV specification to support solution 3, 5, and 2, so 2, 3, and 5, right? Those, what's important is that when we model that, we want to ensure the types, the properties, and the data that the API know how to get to it, all right? To read it, understand it, so it's consistent between the API. Now, we don't specify how you do that magic inside that box, right? So the standards tell you how to write the service template. Also, the standard tell you from Oasis Tosca spec, what's the mean. So 2, 3, and 5 is the API. And the API do depend on the VNF descriptor, the VNF package, and the network service descriptor. So they pull those information and run their own orchestrations and their own lifecycle management per ETSI specifications. There is quite a big debate also. Why this work it takes so long? Because when we developing SOL 1, we also have to take into the considerations that someone, IT, may use NFV VNF descriptor to deploy their own space. And they may use Tosca orchestrators. So we have to model and design the descriptor that can support the Tosca orchestrators, right? But don't assume that you can just take Tosca orchestrator and go in and replace NFVO or VNFM. They are totally different. Different specifications, different behavior, different lifecycle management, different API. And the runtime model also is different. So that's kind of answers that I can give you. Any other questions?